Hi, hello, this is Rebecca Welzenbach. Can everyone still hear me?
Yes.
Great. Welcome. It's great to see so many people signing on. There's a team of us here at the University of Michigan. We're sitting in a conference room, but hopefully what you're seeing is our screen and not us. Is that the case? Are you seeing the slideshow? Sort of not fully seen yet, but about to be? Yes, seeing the screen. Great. Thank you, Mark. So welcome. This is the first webinar that we're offering as sort of part of the LeverPress community, hoping to offer kind of updates and information and a chance for pledging libraries and participants in the whole LeverPress initiative to be in touch with each other and to also just hear what's going on with our progress and how we're doing. So the very first of these that we've imagined is a demo of where we are right now with development of the Fulcrum platform. This is a publishing platform that's currently in development at the University of Michigan. It will ultimately be the sort of place from which LeverPress titles are delivered, but it will serve other purposes as well. And it's funded by a grant from the Mellon Foundation. We're going to have a bit of a presentation about sort of the vision for and the purpose of this platform. Charles Watkinson is going to give that. Charles is the director of the University of Michigan Press and the AUL for publishing here at the U of M Library. He's then going to pass over to my colleague Jeremy Morse, who's our Director of Publishing Technology, and he'll do a demo of the platform as it currently is and talk a bit about what's coming down the line. Charles and Jeremy are the co-PIs on this grant, so they're the closest to what's happening with the platform and what's coming next with it. Hopefully you heard an alert as you connected, but this session is being recorded, so we want to make it available to folks who couldn't participate today. Oh, someone with two screens can see both of us, see us and the presentation. That's good to know. We'll go to full screen in a minute as soon as we start presenting. Let's see. We are recording this presentation. We'll share it out afterwards. I also want to suggest that if you're not already muted, I think most of you are, but to please mute your mic as we go just to avoid any feedback problems with the presentation. If you have questions or comments or points you'd like to make, I encourage you to capture them whenever you want in the chat box. There's a little chat bubble on the right-hand side of your screen, and many of you are using it already. If you enter your questions and comments there, we can use that as a guide when we sort of get to the discussion. So if that sounds okay, I'll hand over to Charles to start, and I'll set this slideshow to go to full screen. And we'll be aware that maybe if you have multiple screens, you can see us anyway.
Well, thank you for joining our webinar today. As Becky said, I'm here at Michigan as Director of University of Michigan Press and Associate University Librarian for Publishing. And I'm also the co-PI of the Fulcrum grant. This is a 3-year grant from the Mellon Foundation. I want to briefly introduce what this project is about and who our partners are. And then after that, I will pass over to Jeremy for a demo. Jeremy Morse is my co-PI. He is the technical lead on the project. Fulcrum is, as expressed to Mellon, a partnership between University of Michigan Library and, as you may know, University of Michigan Library is the parent of University of Michigan Press and 4 other research universities, Penn State University, Northwestern University, Indiana University, and University of Minnesota. So in those 4 institutions, we're working with both the press and the library. Fulcrum is built on the Hydra Fedora software framework. As you again may know, this is a robust set of tools and processes, an open source software environment being used by a number of libraries to build things like media management systems, in the case of Avalon at Indiana, data repositories. That's something that we're doing here at Michigan, and a number of other universities are using the Sophia as a way of building data repositories. So it's Hydra represents a large community of software developers working together on open source tools appropriate for the library world. And our partners at Amherst College are also a Hydra Fedora shop. The Mellon Foundation is providing around $1 million in funding to get this platform off the ground. The project started in April 2015. We're just over halfway through. And we're really looking to the future of sustaining and growing this platform. We've received a lot of interest from other potential users, and we're working with Lyrasis to develop a sustainability plan to develop the roadmap for Fulcrum. So the issue that we went to Mellon with in late 2014, early 2015, was that we and our partner presses were seeing that the scholars who were approaching us with their projects were tending to bring, along with the sort of the narrative, the text, a number of different sorts of files. So basically, they had, during their research, been compiling archives of digital stuff that wasn't strictly textual in nature. And at the point of publication, they really wanted to make that available. These are 3 authors we're working with at the moment. The icons are just meant to represent things like, digital photos, scans of, archival materials, audio recordings, video recordings. The little kind of gaming console fits into one of the projects we're working with, where the team has used software gaming engines to create a sort of a 3-dimensional model of a building. And then just generally sort of data sets of various sorts, both numerical and, just big collections of data. So all of these scholars were looking to their publisher to help them also make available this work alongside their narratives. And they weren't finding very good solutions. So the publisher was helping them look around, and the solutions that are out there weren't quite meeting their needs. So over on the left, one option would be a specialist digital scholarship platform, so something like Scalar. But the problem with those types of projects is it's very hard to integrate them into the information supply chain, so they tend not to be very easily discoverable. Another option, probably most natural for most publishers, would be to go to a commodity ebook platform. So something like Atapon, for example, now owned by Wiley. But these are very commodity products. They're designed for the lowest common denominator, and essentially they're designed for very flat kind of print facsimile sort of ebook products. So they're not flexible. They don't really help these scholars present the full richness of their work. Actually, in many cases, the most common approach was that scholars would sort of just go ahead and build their own websites using tools that were easily available. So, we did a bit of an environmental survey, and we saw a lot of WordPress sites. But the problem about that is so often those solutions are not durable. They're not well preserved. And another aspect of those is, they don't really support stable identifiers very well. So none of these solutions looked particularly good. So that's where Fulcrum came in. And the 3 characteristics of Fulcrum that we sort of try and reinforce again and again are the idea that Fulcrum is discoverable. So digital objects existing on the Fulcrum platform have stable identifiers. And those stable identifiers are integrated allow us to integrate with information supply chains. So we can make sure that, Google and Google Scholar will find objects on our platform. We can also increasingly work with sort of specialist abstracting and indexing services. Essentially, we make this possible, this digital object, capable of being integrated into a library catalog. That's one of the major measures of success. So I'm pointing there with the arrow at a handle, a citable link as a handle. We'll also use DOIs where appropriate. The second feature we like to emphasize about Fulcrum is it's flexible. So what you're seeing here is it's connected to a University of Minnesota Press title about the cultural history of the canoe. there's a light box here, which is allowing a user to really zoom in on this image, examine it, drag it around. But the thing about that is this light box is based on the Leaflet app, developed, in fact, from Maps originally. So because we're in an open source development environment and we're building off other things the Hydra community has developed, we can be responsive to the sorts of needs that authors have as they develop, as we see new needs develop from the digital scholarship projects we want to support, we can work with the community to develop appropriate tools. And then finally, and this is really the core concept behind Fulcrum, these works are durable. These digital objects will be preserved at the level that we as one of the nodes in the research library infrastructure can steward. So this is the same system behind the scenes as we build our research data repository on here at Michigan. We are saying, if you publish with us, if you publish on Fulcrum, we will make the same stewardship commitment that we would to any research data set deposited in that repository. And of course, that means not only local storage and redundant local storage, but also integration into multi-institutional networks like AP Trust, for example. So I just wanted to say briefly, give a brief sense of the roadmap. The grant has two phases to it, and the place we wanted to start was we wanted to start with companion websites to publications that were being made available by university presses. The reason that we wanted to do that, and here's an example from Northwestern University Press, is we felt that this was where scholars were at this moment. This is like the major need that we saw, that a book like Thing, the monograph, that was still very, very important for tenure and other reasons, but that the scholar really wanted to have sort of a companion place, a place where they could put this other digital stuff. So this is phase one. So we're working with the 4 other university presses to create companion websites to books. One of the things that Northwestern is working with us on particularly is making sure that the ebook, in this case it's called of the title, it's called The Director's Prism. It's about early Russian film. We wanted to be sure that the ebook had very, very deep links to the Fulcrum site. So the enriched ebook has, stable links at each image level. There are also additional images and video and audio files on this site. But you'll see very good links between the narrative and the associated data. Then phase 2 is moving forward into the world of truly integrated digital publications, things that could not really ever be represented properly in print form. We have a particular project at University of Michigan that we're using as the sort of the main example of this for the purposes of the grant. And this is an archaeological report about the site of Gabii, which was an early Iron Age site that competed with Rome at a time when all these Italian city-states were competing and looking to get to the next level. Gabii didn't make it, Rome did, but that means that it's a very large open site that can be dug, and there's a very large excavation project working on that, and they have been working for a number of years using digital tools. So a mid-Republican house from Gabii is presented in a form that could not be reproduced in print. The 3 parts of the Gabii project are a database, and that contains all the records of finds and context from the site. A narrative, and that is a fairly conventional narrative. It has some images associated, but it's like a narrative description of the site. And then a 3D model which is shown, a little bit of this is shown here. As I mentioned, it's built on the software gaming engine Unity 3D, and it allows a user to come in and rotate, sort of move through the space, rotate the space, examine the spatial organization. So here's just a screenshot of what we're working on. This is not yet live on our system, and in fact, we are first of all actually making it available on another system to just see how it works before moving it into Fulcrum. But this is Gabi, and the point about this, which is so interesting in the context of digital publishing, is that the way the authors are thinking about this project is very audience-focused. So they're thinking about different types of audience approaching this digital project from different angles with different questions. So you may have somebody working on early Iron Age urban centers, for example, and they might well come to the narrative. They're trying to create a synthetic view of that kind of topic, and the narrative is still really important to them. You may have somebody who's doing a study of cooking wares, and they're just looking for examples from a number of different sites. They might well come into this project through the data set. They might just want to do a search there. You may have somebody, and these are all sort of real archaeological problems, as many of you know, so uses of space, space and gender, things like that. Just somebody who really wants to explore the space of this domestic house from the mid-Republican period, and they might well approach through the visual interface. But we need to be sure that once they get into the product, they can then navigate as seamlessly as possible between the three different parts of it. This is not something you need to look at terribly closely. It's a bit of a web of things, but I think the important thing here is this is a sort of a visualization of the University of Michigan's Hydra Fedora strategy, and you'll see it sort of reinforces the point that what we're doing here is we're building a publishing system on top of other library infrastructure. And so because, all of us in this room are sort of really part of the library infrastructure world, that's a very important and distinctive part of Fulcrum, that it's in many ways a kind of a socially interesting as well as technologically interesting. In many ways, the sort of the political, the social part of this, and the shared values that we have as libraries are absolutely at the core of Fulcrum. And the other thing about this is you see that preservation is really a big feature. You have all these layers of this whole stack, which has at the bottom very robust preservation infrastructure, since everything we know is that the preservation of digital scholarship is one of the biggest problems that we as a community face. So that's really the sort of the backdrop. Fulcrum.org is where you can find more information about the project and sign up for the newsletter. And I hope you see, and I think hopefully we can bring this back together at the end of the presentation, but I'm hoping you see some of the ways in which this connects to the Lever Press's ambitions. This can support a variety of different types of digital publication. It can support things that are relatively simple, and many innovation for many of the sort of proposed and some of the theories and some of the ideas, the product groups that we're working on. Innovation may lie in the way the argument is constructed, in the sort of the idea more than the technology. But also, Fulcrum is very, very capable and flexible around helping faculty members create and achieve new types of publishing product. So working with Lever Press, we can help them move their digital ambitions into a space which is very stable, very durable, and is discoverable through the library system. So I'm going to hand over now to Jeremy, who can maybe just lead us through a bit of a live demo.
Sure. So as not to embarrass myself, if you would steer us over to the browser there, Becky, thank you. Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about, again, I'm Jeremy Morse, Director of Publishing Technology and Technical Lead. I just want to talk a little bit about the software development methodology that we're using to build the site. I don't know if you are familiar with the Agile Philosophy or the various Agile Methodologies. Basically, it's a principle of rather than trying to plan out and then build the entire project at once and then have one big release date at the end of your development process, you try to break your development up into smaller chunks and release on a regular schedule. We release software every 2 weeks with an update to the site and just try to add like incremental value to the thing you're building. So some things you'll see will sort of represent a minimal representation of larger functionality that we're going to flesh out later. But the idea is to release it rapidly, gives you a chance to sort of do proofs of concept for larger problems and to get feedback that you incorporate as you're building. So what you're seeing here on fulcrum.org is the information page, which is, we call it the brochureware for the site. And this is just a static web page that's integrated into the app, but it's sort of separate from it. It's like any other HTML web page you might find. But it gives us a chance to give a little introduction and overview to the platform and the project of building it. And of course, I have to point out where you can sign up for our email newsletter to get updates as we send them out. It's a good way to stay informed. Here we have some links to some of the two use cases. A third is coming up maybe tomorrow. Content that is currently up on the Fulcrum platform, and these are with from the partner presses on our Mellon grant. So I'm going to take you into the Northwestern University Press title here, which you saw some screenshots from in Charles' slideshow. And actually, I'm going to go back up one step to the press page. So here is sort of, now we are in the app here, but this is an example of, again, like brochureware or aboutware, where it gives us a chance to give an overview of the publisher as a whole, and then sort of an overview of the titles that they have represented in the platform. So there's only one title in here so far, so there's not much here to see here. And this is kind of minimal, just a brief paragraph right now, but we really see fleshing this out to have maybe other sub-pages, about pages, contacts, author guidelines, whatever would make sense for the publisher. We want to have templates here where a press could, flesh out, give some more information about the organization as a whole. If we leap into one of the books, here we see an overview of, again, some information about the book, and this could be fleshed out in the future, and then a list that gives you an overview of all the materials, all the components or assets for this book that have been uploaded. As Charles described, we're in phase 1, so we're really just sort of laying the foundation of being able to support this as a repository for media objects of various formats and to present those and have them be findable in a durable way. Eventually, these would all be embedded in a fully digital text.
Sounds like we're having a little sound trouble. If everybody could please check your microphone and see that it's muted, just click on the microphone icon to mute yourself. We'd be grateful. Thank you.
So Hydra is at its roots a library repository software, which we're extending and repurposing into a publishing platform. So a lot of this behavior is things you might see in other library repositories, and including this use of search facets. This allows you to, filter your list based on the metadata that was entered when the content was ingested. you all can hear me. I feel like I'm competing with a wind tunnel. Okay. So right now, the editor, maybe in collaboration with the author, that's really up to the editor, fills out a spreadsheet using a template that we've set up, where they can define all of the metadata for all of the assets. And when those get ingested, that gets indexed so it's all searchable, and then it can be used here to filter search results, either filter the collection of a whole or to further filter the search results from a search that you've done. And so this metadata is all provided by the editor/author. Some things are a little more strictly qualitative in the sense that they characterize the types of content, the files directly that have been uploaded. So what might be useful here is to take a look at one of these individual assets. Let's jump down into Kapellmeister here. So here we have a record for a high-res image. We're using the Leaflet software plugin here, which is really designed for maps. There's other options we could have used, but we like Leaflet's accessibility, which is really a high priority for us. In fact, we're doing another accessibility review of the platform as it exists so far in January.
I just saw alt text appearing over that image.
Again, yeah, that's again, this alt text would be something that would be provided in the spreadsheet, or eventually when we replace the spreadsheet upload with the web-based, like batch editing form. But we have other, the translation, captions, but just then not only just the information that's embedded in here, but the ability to control everything with your keyboard or with voice commands if you were using the appropriate software. So we're building that into the platform from the ground up. Using Leaflet here, we can pan and zoom, as far as the resolution of the original image allows. Because of the licensing requirements of the museum that this image was licensed from for the use of the text, we're restricting the ability to download the full image, so that if you were to try to steal this for your own purposes, you'd only be able to capture a tile at a time. If we're serving it to your browser, then you're de facto downloading it, so we can't prevent that from happening. But we can make it as difficult and onerous as possible to grab the full content. And of course, we could offer the full image for download as well. Here under these different tabs, we have other metadata that could be provided. Here's an example of minimal functionality I was talking about. That's really proof of concept, where we're pulling Google Analytics stats over their API and displaying them here. Once we figured out exactly what we want to display here, we could pull anything out of Google Analytics and display it here. And we learned something in the process, for instance, that we can't update this in real time because it brings us up to the limit for Google Analytics quota for how many times you can query their API. And it's really all the bots hitting our site that were forcing us to hit that. So we check once a day with Google API, get the counts, and then store that in our database and display it. So these will update sometime around 3 o'clock in the morning tomorrow. And then we have technical metadata. This is all extracted automatically when the files are uploaded, so you don't have to worry about it. But it gives more information to not only to an end user, but to us for managing this content long term from a preservation perspective. Of course, we have our social sharing options down here. If we wanted to look at some other types of media formats that we're supporting right now, we have video clips, where we're using this playback engine that allows you to scan forward if you needed to. You could go full screen. Again, the quality here is limited by the quality of the source. And we have translations here of the intertitles. We are actually looking at a different video playback tool to use, which has better accessibility features for controlling it with your keyboard or with voice commands, and would allow the transcription to be more embedded into the video. So that's something that we're looking at now. I should also point out that if you didn't want to keep jumping back to the results list, you can just page through other examples of content, and the editor, whoever is setting up this title, can set the order that these display in. And really looking at, one thing we'll be looking at in the future is more interesting ways of arranging content than something that's really functionally a search results list. And then we also have sound files. It's actually using the same player as the videos. And I don't know if we'll be able to hear an example now. You'll have to trust me that it does play. Well, there you go. You'd be hearing lively polka music, I think, right now, that accompany the silent films that are part of the study. So, you know, the use case that we're really kind of building with in mind so far is someone follows a citation or the durable URL directly to this item, and that's borne out by our experience with our current platform, is that most traffic that comes to a journal article or a book chapter or what have you is either coming from a direct citation or from a Google search. But we do need to, we are building in an interface that will allow for someone who will treat this as a portal, who will want to explore what a given press has published on the platform, or will be navigating through a title as they're reading the book. So that's all things we're looking at in sort of our next wave of iteration, and things we'll want feedback on. So the timeline for development from this point on is we have 2 more use cases from University of Indiana Press and Penn State University Press. We'll be getting their content in. Every content we get in, the metadata needs are a little bit different because metadata is complex and varied, and so we have to figure out what else we have to support to make it work with the content. But then beyond that, our next year of development is really focusing on support for the fully encoded text so that we can display that Gabby narrative here on the Fulcrum platform, embed this music player or the video players or the image players into that text. So within the context of the flow of the text, you can see you know, a rich presentation of the media. And then on the other end of that is a better ingest workflow tools, so that someone could have a managed, mediated workflow all in their browser to get their content uploaded, their metadata defined, and manage the collection for their press. And we're looking to have Gabby with the fully encoded text and with the 3D in Fulcrum by March 2018.
And I think that the 3 particular projects that are moving forward most speedily on in the Lever Press, the sort of the digitally enabled projects, we've examined those. There is no technological need, no functionality that we can't currently support with the things that we've developed already in Fulcrum. So they will be, I don't know where they'll fit in relation to Gabby, but certainly sometime around the same time.
Okay, great. Thank you both. I'm going to back out of the presentation, and then I'll be able to see the chat box, which I haven't been monitoring live as we've been doing this, and see what kinds of questions and comments have come in, and we'll go from there. We invite your feedback. If I can get out a full screen view.
Control-Shift-F or Command-Shift-F.
Yes, there we go. Screen. And bring this back up. Okay. Oh, sorry. We were losing Jeremy in and out. Where do the multimedia files live, and is there a preservation plan? Jeremy, could you speak to that?
So Fulcrum is, as Charles kind of talked about in the overview, Fulcrum is built on the same library repository, the same Fedora repository that the Deep Blue Research Data Repository for the University of Michigan is built on. And that's really kind of the Hydra, that's how the Hydra platform got its name, is the idea that you could have one body being the one repository and then several heads, each being different applications, both for ingesting content into the repository and displaying it based on the type of content, based on the stakeholders that would need to be interacting with the app, and what have you. And we see that as fundamental to the preservation policy in our ability to enact those for this content, is that whatever goes into that repository is subject to the same preservation policies and practices as any other library content that's in that repository.
It's all University of Michigan library-backed infrastructure, basically.
And it's important that it's not just the technology, but as Jeremy said, it's the policies. So we have a hierarchy of preservation commitments based on the types of file that we're supporting. And the Fulcrum policies are very, very closely modeled and work in lockstep with the Deep Blue Data policy. So that Deep Blue Data is the University of Michigan Library's research data repository.
And that comes down to which file formats we'll accept or what preservation promises we can make for a given file format. I apologize that I was fading out or if I reverted to mumbling mode. Do you have any specific questions and we don't get to them now, I'd be happy to follow up afterwards as well.
I think, so we did mention the other two presses currently on the grant project are Penn State and Indiana. Those will be forthcoming.
Another partner who will be migrating to Fulcrum is the American Council of Learned Societies Humanities eBook Collection. So we already support them, and they're very excited by working with us on Fulcrum.
And as well, of course, just the University of Michigan itself. Michigan Publishing has a long history of doing open access journals and open monographs, and Fulcrum will be the platform for all of those publications, as well as a representation of all of our titles that we imagine online. So to speak to that point, Mike Roy asked, will Fulcrum also provide a catalog function to allow for browsing of titles? The short answer is yes. Do you want to say a bit more about how that's imagined, Jeremy?
Right. So my long-term aspiration is that I can retire the University of Michigan Press catalog site because Fulcrum will provide everything we need to do that. And that really just comes down to when you're on the book summary page on the platform, just fleshing out what information can be provided there. And that's the kind of idea of the about where it's a templated form, so through a web interface you could fill in the information. Eventually we'll want to feed that from our title management database, and then have it involved in sending out metadata feeds to our distributors. So that's again, I think that's going to be a long iterative process to get there, but that is definitely my aspiration.
And so there'd be a page like you showed us for Northwestern University Press, although there's only one title so far. There'd be sort of a branded space for a press, like you alluded, as much information as that press wants about itself, and even things like author guidelines, information that a press would want to communicate to the world about itself, as well as some sort of representation of all the titles, the ability to browse through them. And
right.
And that's what we would also probably envisage for levelpress.org. I mean, that's a conversation that we've been having with members of the Oversight Committee and with our partners at Amherst College.
And just to clarify, I think for the near term or at launch, having something like a template that could just be filled out and would act as a catalog page is something we would be able to do. Having something where it's feeding in from another source where you're already maintaining that would be the longer term goal.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see. A few questions here. Catalog function, are the digital assets technically considered in line with the text? So what we're seeing right now, not yet, because we're seeing asset by asset, each sort of representative page. But when the digital text is supported, it would be sort of both, right? Each asset would have its fully described page, but there'd also be a representation of it as desired within the text.
At minimum, we need it to be displayable in line in the text. It's an interesting question of whether in every case, whether that asset also needs to be able to seen in isolation with its own record. I suspect in some cases the publisher is not interested in showing that. So being able to manage how that's presented to the user is something I think we need to provide some options on.
Will Fulcrum print its partner presses to brand their own sites, or will everything be under fulcrum.org? The conversations we've had about domain names are long and complex, but yeah, how will presses be able to?
So what we're working from is a model, and it's not implemented, so you won't actually see it on the live site, is that every press would have a subdomain of the fulcrum.org domain. Whether things could be fully hosted under another domain, I mean, there's other ways to think about that. I mean, we are releasing the software open source, so anybody could take the code and host their own instance of the software. Fulcrum.org is really the brand for our hosted service. So if we're hosting you, you'll be under the fulcrum.org domain.
I mean, yes. I mean, it's a more complicated question than it seems, but generally, the philosophy here is that Fulcrum is in the background. So it's kind of powered by Fulcrum, and we do want to foreground the partner presser's identity. There are issues to do with the way the domain name appears, which I think are connected to how to express stable URLs. I mean, there's a whole bundle of issues within here, but the philosophy, the underlying philosophy, will play out in the end, which is we want to have Fulcrum very much in the background and the presser's brand very much in the foreground. So stay tuned on that.
A question about what this means for ACLS Humanities ebook.
So that's a good question. Essentially, what you're doing when you access ACLS Humanities ebooks at the moment is you're working with University of Michigan's DLXS platform. So this is just really a behind-the-scenes move that shouldn't be particularly visible to subscribers. It will be all the content. It won't just be auxiliary content. And it certainly doesn't mean that ACLS Humanities ebook is going open access. One of the things that we should have mentioned is that Fulcrum also supports restricted access. And ACLS is very interested in experimenting with open access, and in fact, you will see some more open access content appearing on their platform, but it remains a subscription product.
Yeah, when Humanities ebook suddenly looks better, it will have migrated to Fulcrum.
Yeah.
Re-author guideline postings. How much control will each press have for these press pages? So there's sort of two questions there. One is the content, how much control does each press have over the content, and one is about technical, like who can actually manage the page and update it and change it. Content, that will be entirely each press. Fulcrum, or Michigan has no interest in imposing recommended guidelines or, requirements. Certainly guidance can be provided about file format specs, that kind of thing, but it would be up to each press to decide what information, what content they want on those descriptive pages and to sort of write it for themselves. So the University of Michigan Press could put our own author guidelines up there. University of Minnesota Press could put theirs up. No interest in interfering in that process. As for the ability to go in and manage those pages, I don't know the answer to that question. And I don't know if we know yet.
No, we want to get to the place where there's something like a press administrator who has a good measure of control over how their content is presented on the platform. What we're not trying to support is something where the authors would have direct access, just because I think in terms of our supporting of the platform, we want to have, we want our relationship to be with the press, with the publisher. So, we're kind of assuming that the content has already been gotten into a publishable state as far as the press is concerned, and that we're working with the editor or production manager, whoever it is that's actually interacting with the platform. But that within there, they'd be able to have some control to configure how the press or the title information pages display, what information is there, and what metadata is attached to each asset.
Okay, so yeah, just as you described, some management ability to control and update and make changes at the level of the publisher. We don't envision unmediated direct access for authors. Right. Exactly. Yeah, Mike is pointing out this is a big difference from things like WordPress and Scalar, which are seen as authoring environments. That's true. I think a huge thing that we have in mind here is, not just the presentation of any individual book, but sort of the relationship to the whole, the way that a whole catalog can be represented, that a press's brand can be sort of imposed and wrapped around everything. And I think we really are thinking of this as a publisher platform, which it is quite different from sort of one-off project-by-project approaches, which is the way many of these author-driven sites tend to work. Just scroll back and see if I missed anything. Margie, I see you made a couple other comments about just inline, whether the images should be in line with the text. I think maybe you're referring there to saying that assets should be visible in both ways, both in line with the text and sort of fully described in their own space. If that's not what you meant, feel free to make another comment, and we'll catch it up down here. All the data points about the work would be accessible on the static catalog page. I think so. Control the press pages we've talked about, difference from authoring environments. Yeah, individual client publisher control, to confirm, is what we're talking about. Are we seeking new publisher partners, and how wide do we want to cast the net?
If you know there's anyone who's interested, we're interested in talking to them.
Yes, yeah, we absolutely are interested in other publisher partners who might want to work with us. I think our mind is open about how wide we want to cast that net, so we'd be glad to hear from institutions, organizations, presses, publishers who might be interested. What a sort of business model or service offering will look like exactly is something that we're focused on very much, sort of in parallel to this development process, but is by no means finalized yet. So we're eager to hear from people who might be interested and to find out what you're looking for. Migration. Peggy's asking about migration from WordPress or Scalar.
So what we're building right now, so the scope of what we're building at this point in time starts with the publisher having a, air quotes, camera-ready manuscript, or something that's already been approved and ready to be uploaded. And the file format is set for whatever it is we're going to support. So if it was something like a component, right now the platform will take whatever file you throw at it, but it's just going to treat it as a file. So it either knows how to allow you to preview it in some way from the various ways I showed you, or it's just a file that it allows for download. Where we want to get to is if you uploaded, let's just say, I'm speculating a little bit, an EPUB 3.1 file, which conformed to a certain number of encoding guidelines, then it will present it in a fully readable browser-bound experience where you can page through the book, where it will embed high-res images using the pan and zoom tiling and all of that. Anything before that point in the chain of getting your content ready to that state, that would be a future project. And we'll be figuring that out for ourselves given the tool chains that we work with, which tend to start with a Microsoft Word file, not always, but almost always. And then we use the Scribe tool chain to generate either the InDesign file that we need, or the XML, or the EPUB file that we currently publish with. So we're looking at this as taking that existing publishing or production tool chain that we have, taking its output, and then that goes into the Fulcrum platform. And then, the authoring platform would come before that point of the tool chain, right? So all of these things could be connected, or even, maybe used in isolation from each other. I would think of those as separate. I wouldn't think of that all as Fulcrum. I would think right now, just my current way of thinking is Fulcrum starts with the publishing of the thing. The production or the authoring would be separate tools that you could sequence together, but wouldn't necessarily have to.
Yeah. So I think the short version of this is that there will not be a button that says like import WordPress site that will just work. Sorry, we have another meeting here starting pretty soon. But what we would be able to provide is sort of specs about what can be imported and sort of what state it needs to be in. And then as we go and as we hear what people are coming from, we may be able to work farther and farther up that ladder. Maybe.
Right. So like if it's a real world example, if it was a LeverPress title that currently existed or was developed as a WordPress site, it would just be the job of the production team for LeverPress to figure out how to convert that into what Fulcrum needed to upload it.
To export from the WordPress site, the XML, whatever assets were there, and then to sort of reconfigure them in order to make it possible to ingest them. So, I think
and we do things like that for other titles,
all the time.
For Michigan Press titles.
Yeah.
It's just that Fulcrum won't do that for you.
There will be some manual manipulation involved in moving between platforms, I think is the best way to put it. Let's see, a workflow. It might be interesting to consider a workflow where the author works within Fulcrum and then at some point in the process hands over the keys and only the press can edit going forward. Yeah, so Jeremy just described that we're currently envisioning authoring spaces as separate from this publishing platform, but we're aware of really interesting development going on. Like Editoria is one, right? Manifold is another. Other university-driven publishing platforms, authoring platforms that we're interested in finding ways to link up to.
Yeah, and we are talking to them. So, we're trying to, ideally you'd be able to go take output from a number of authoring platforms and then ingest that into Fulcrum, right? So keeping these things separated, I think, is a good thing because it makes the whole overall operation more flexible. You could swap in and out different publishing platforms or authoring platforms as long as they can get you content in format X, and Fulcrum can take format X, then it gives you more flexibility than everything being kind of a monolith.
Yeah, so it's a matter of communication and connection between these different platforms so that what comes out of the authoring platform is something that can go into, in a rather seamless way, the Fulcrum platform. So we're in communication with folks developing many of these platforms. We've had some preliminary conversations with the Scalar folks. But yeah, something that feels to us a bit outside the bounds of Fulcrum as it's currently defined, but functionality that we certainly see as desirable and useful and want to be able to figure out how to make it work.
And we've even toyed with the idea of prescribing an authoring platform, because it sure would make the production process easier if you could control the authoring platform. Unfortunately, by the time you're first talking to your author, they've already usually started writing in their own and are very particular about the tools that they use to do that.
So Mike's emphasizing the point here that particular authoring platforms, the whole point is the way the work is rendered in that platform, and so that an export-import sort of functionality isn't really what they're looking for anyway. What they want is to have their sort of full control over the work in that platform. Yeah, I mean, certainly this is a need that some scholars have and that we hear. And I think if that's the case, if what you want is for the work to be presented, in, for example, the way it is in Scalar, in this sort of way that you very carefully have outlined and defined, I think that is something that, whether that can be, I don't see a Scalar site as being something that sort of like lives inside of Fulcrum. I think these are things that would be sort of in parallel. Whether they point between one or the other or communicate between the two in some way, whether the Scalar version is sort of the presentation version and there's some sort of preservation happening on Fulcrum, exactly how that might be defined, I think remains to be seen, and it's something that we want to figure out. But I think we just have to say that yeah, we understand that there are cases where some authors will have a particular case that just needs to be presented the way it was authored, and we'll have to, I think, tackle those sort of on a case-by-case basis as they emerge for our needs.
Yeah, and this ends up presenting a preservation risk. I mean, the more you've authored your content with a specific platform in mind, the more difficult it is to preserve that content and migrate it to another platform. And Scalar's having this issue now, where you can export the content from Scalar, but if you've done their multi-threaded navigation, that's only really a usable content if you import it back into another Scalar instance. We're really trying to stick with formats that are platform neutral, so that Fulcrum could blow away or die, but if you had the underlying repository, you still have useful content that you know how to use, and migrate to whatever the next format du jour is. Not du jour, to Annum, Millennium, hopefully, in the future.
Margie, it looks like, is also articulating some sort of differences in understanding between what is meant by authoring and what might be going on at that stage, and what's meant by publishing and what might be going on at that stage. I think these are really important issues. I mean, certainly they're driving much of the way we're thinking about Fulcrum. I'm just conscious that scholars who are really pushing the bleeding edge see this as a much more continuous sort of process, and I do know that those folks are out there, and we hope some of them will want to work with Lever. So we'll find ways to understand their work and work with it as best we can. But I do think a separation between the idea of authoring and the idea of publishing is sort of at the core of how Fulcrum's been thought of in any case. We're closing in on 1 o'clock. I'm afraid I will have to end us right on time because there's a phone call coming into this room that I need to make way for. If there are other questions or comments, please feel free to throw them in. As I mentioned, this has been recorded, and so I will, export the recording and make it available and distribute it so that, folks who weren't able to be here can see it, or if you want to revisit anything. I will also put our email addresses in here. Again, please feel free to reach out to us if you have questions. J.G. Morse?
Yes.
We'd be happy to follow up offline, or if you want to, just learn more or ask us anything in particular, do feel free to write. As well, something I'll just mention for Lever folks sort of at large. This is the first time we've done sort of a information session like this, a demo. We would like to maybe do more on Fulcrum as it is developed and new features come out. We can do this again to keep you up to date, but we'd also like to tackle other topics. We have a few in mind. It's something we've talked about with the Oversight Committee and with others about what we'd like to share about what work is going on and how to keep you up to speed about what we're doing. But if there are topics that you're interested in hearing more about, that you would like to tackle sort of in conversation with your other fellow librarians and participants in this project, please feel free to share those as well, and we'd love to hear your input and see what we can do to have sort of regularly available opportunities to talk to one another and share what's going on in a way that would be interesting to you. Okay, thank you very much. I think we'll wrap at this point. Hope this was useful. Again, please feel free to come back with more questions or comments afterward, and we'll talk to you all later.
Bye.
Bye. I'm going to stop the recording.